Hello, how are you today? It is Monday, and October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the U.S. And here on Marketers on a Mission, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Week. My guest today starts us off, widely respected author Karen Whiting. She's going to share how her husband Jim's cancer journey, about her husband's Jim's cancer journey, and how God walked them through it. Hi, I'm Patricia Durgan, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission. We present marketing tutorials and interviews to help Christian writers and speakers share their message online. But this week, as I mentioned earlier, we have a special theme the entire week. We want to learn more and share more stories of hope and faith about breast cancer. So glad you're here. This is episode number 141, Men Get Breast Cancer Too, with author Karen Whiting. Hello, Karen. How are you?
I'm fine, Patricia. Thanks for having me on.
We so appreciate it. You have a somewhat unique story to tell us that we are not familiar with, or very much familiar with, and we're interested in finding out what God has to say through you. Let's start before cancer. Describe your life with your husband Jim before cancer, please.
Well, we had a very full life. We lived anywhere from New York to Hawaii and Michigan to Florida. With the Coast Guard moving us around, we raised 5 children. 2 became rocket scientists. One of those boys went to MIT, the other went to the Air Force Academy. The girls have done well too. And we have 12 grandchildren. Before he was diagnosed, we had 10. And just before he was diagnosed, our oldest son was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and left his family with us. So we had our daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren living with us at the time, and a month before his diagnosis, his mother passed away. So it was quite an interesting life.
That's a lot of emotional and spiritual stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
For lack of a better way to say it. Let me see. I've got a picture. Let me see if the Lord will help me. Here we are. Can you see that, Karen?
I can, yes. There's my sweetie.
This is so indicative of before and during cancer, isn't it? You make a wonderful couple, a marvelous couple. You both look so good and healthy and wonderful and happy. And then we have this, and this was, do you remember, it was obviously during his illness. Do you remember, was it?
That was in July, 2 months before he passed away, so 2.5 years after the diagnosis. And on the other side of me is another author, Sherry Cowell. I'm not sure if you've had her on or not, but we were celebrating with a number of ASA's sisters and CAN sisters and brothers at the International Christian Retail Show, and went out to eat that night.
Okay, I'm just trying to check and make sure. Yes, I wanted to make sure that the picture could be shown. Now I'm going to stop showing the picture. Excuse me. What caused him, he had a lump in his breast. Did he just happen to find that, and that's what precipitated the first doctor appointment?
Yes, he found a lump in his breast at the end of the year 2009 and went to the doctor. And the doctor had an x-ray done and a few little tests and said, "Oh, come back in about a year," and dismissed it as nothing. Even though Jim did say he had 2 sisters who had battled breast cancer.
Oh, my goodness. That floors me. Did you consider going elsewhere, or were you allowed to go elsewhere with him being a Coast Guard commander?
We went to places, and I suggested that he do that, but he did not.
Okay, we're going to leave that right there. We're just going to leave that right there. He was retired. How long had he been retired from the Coast Guard?
He retired in 1994, and this was 2009, so that had been 15 years earlier. He was working as a naval architect designing shipyards around the world for Rolls-Royce Naval Marine.
Your family's so smart, Karen. How wonderful for everyone. And you had 15 years with him that didn't involve, well, he had duties and responsibilities, but you had a little bit more leeway than you had as he was on active duty. Is that right?
Well, that's hard to say. Active duty, he was deployed sometimes for 60 days at a time. When he worked for Rolls-Royce, he was traveling around the world, usually just a couple weeks at a time. So he was still coming and going all the time. The difference was our children were older, and I was also traveling at times by then.
Well, let's go back to the children. You had 5, and what were their ages again at this time?
At the time, in 2009,
yes,
the youngest would have been 19. So the oldest would have been 33 then.
So they had plenty of time to know their dad. Yeah.
Yes, they did. The grandchildren were a different story because, of course, they were younger.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excuse me. Tell us about what is commonly known in this arena as Diagnosis Day, please.
Oh, when he really found out what was going on. And that was not until 2010. Actually, so it must have been 2008 he first went with the lump, because 2010 it was the end of one year and the beginning 13, 14 months later that he really went back. Mm-hmm. So at that point, when we found out it was not only stage 4 breast cancer at this point, because he had waited that time and then he went back, and it took more than 12 months because of things happening in our family life, we were really floored that it was so far advanced after being told it was nothing for so long. Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, we just kind of prayed and said, well, it's in God's hands. And we'll see what happens. He was told he had 2 to 3 months to live.
And the Lord did give him more time than that, didn't he?
2.5 years. That he was still working and traveling.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
He didn't give up, did he?
No, even the picture we saw, that was taken in Florida, and we were living in Maryland. He went to Florida 2 months as we knew it was getting towards the end, and spent a month in Florida, part of the time with me and part of the time visiting family while I went off on a speaking tour.
Now, we're going to talk just a moment about your books later, but we're going to swing by that. But where were you in your writing career at that time? You were already started, of course.
Oh, yes. I had quite a few books out, and the book he most wanted me to have published, released, I was writing it after he was diagnosed, I guess, and it came out in 2012 in the spring, early summer, and he died in the fall of 2012. So he was able to see that book, and that is Stories of Faith and Courage from the Home Front, from the French and Indian War to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it tells the military family life, the aspect of wartime from the woman, family, children's perspective.
And that did very well, didn't it?
Well, it certainly got a lot of awards, and it's still out there. So, yes, it's a good book.
Excuse me. How did you, were both sets of parents alive at that time?
No, at that time, all of our parents had passed away. The last one had passed away, his mother, 2 years before he was diagnosed. Well, she passed away 1 month before he was diagnosed, 2 years before he passed away.
So you didn't, those were conversations you were spared. And they were spared as well.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how did the children, 19 to 34, so they're old enough and yet nobody's ready for their parent to pass. How did that go?
Well, they all, of course, wanted to see him, and we did not want money to be a problem. So one of the things we said was anyone who wanted to see him, we would pay for flights or anything they needed to come visit. And a number of them at various times came up to see him and to be with us, which was good. We just said it was just carte blanche. Whenever you want, you can come. The hard one was trying to tell Michael, because he was deployed in Iraq at the time. And his family were staying with us for those 7 months. So
they were aware of it, and they saw the day-to-day struggles and opportunities and victories.
Yes.
Was he able to get a short-term leave and come see his dad?
No, we didn't even request it. At that point, it was only going to be a few more months before he would come. And we didn't think, I know the doctors thought it was more critical, but Jim and I did not think it was that critical at the time. And we were right. We just turned out from God that he had time to come home.
Mm. You and he were strong Christians before this occurred. You've been serving, I mean, for what, 30 years or more, you've served God, not only in your church, but at the Naval Academy. I mean, you have had a broad history of service to Christ. Um, you must have had people all over the world who knew of your situation and were praying and supporting you. Did you?
Oh, we did. I have one friend who's head of BCMI, which is an international mission group, and he got home and he woke up one morning and said to his wife, I was woken up and had to pray for Jim Whiting, what's going on with him? And she said, oh, I forgot to tell you he has breast cancer, because he'd been away when I let Jeanette know. That's Jeanette Wendell and Marty Wendell. And so he started praying for him and prayed for him the whole time and saw him during that time also. So there were people that God just told them to pray, even if we had not.
Oh, that is so beautiful, isn't it?
Yes. And then he let his classmates know it was coming up on the 40th reunion for the class, just before he passed away, when he was in that final time of hospice care at home. And so anyone who lived south of Maryland, even those who were in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, all set up on this one Sunday on their way to or from the reunion. I don't remember which way they were traveling, to stop at our house and see him. And another classmate's widow was a good friend of mine, came over to help that day. And another classmate, that one of his best friends who had passed on, his daughter and her child, came up with her child for that weekend. So we had quite a reunion for Jim at that time. And he was in good humor and doing, still talking and everything, which was good. It was very close. That was, he came by just about 3 weeks before he passed.
Mm. Not everybody has all of these, or not even, some people don't even have some of these wonderful stories to tell. And they are just as obedient Christians as you and Jim were. That's just not what the Lord's plan was for them or their family at that time. But you had all these people you had invested in all these years. Did you mention something to me about the students?
Oh, the students at the Naval Academy. We didn't so much at that point see the students at the Coast Guard Academy, because they were already out in the fleet and everywhere, and some of them had even retired by this time. But the ones at the Naval Academy, we would still go over there as long as Jim was able to minister to the midshipmen on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. I would bring dinner to the midshipmen and homemade bread. So he came, and he did ask to speak at one time to give his testimony, because he felt God wanted him to do that. And so, of course, they opened up for him to do so.
This is so helpful, so helpful. Let me see if we have any comments or questions. Janet McHenry says, hello, Karen and Patricia. Thanks for being here, Janet. We always appreciate seeing your beautiful face. When you received the diagnosis, you and Jim received it, tell me I'm not sure if if I've worded this correctly, but I know that immediately some things changed. What were they, so that other people that are maybe facing this with their friends or family or themselves that might be watching this live or in the replay, what can they expect to change immediately, Karen?
Well, immediately we went and changed our will again. You just have to look at the things you must do. Okay, and that's an important thing to think about. So certainly paperwork had to be taken care of, and we did that as much as we could. Mm-hmm. Jim's company, Rolls-Royce, they sew back to him. I don't know if any company does as much for their employees during the time and afterwards. There were actually 2 times that he was working from home, and one time I think they did put him on a medical leave, and they set up and did all the paperwork for him to receive his pay during that time. They still called and consulted him, and as soon as he was ready to go back to work, he did that. They'd come out to the house. There was just a lot they did, and when he passed away, they assigned one person from Rolls-Royce just to work with me to get through all the paperwork and things. It's an international company. Mm-hmm. The stocks they gave him were actually UK stocks. It was not an easy transition to take care of those. So there were certain things that are very different.
Mm-hmm. More blessings that not everyone has been given.
Yes. Right.
Mm.
And our neighbors were so supportive. I said, they asked what they could do, and I said, we probably need a bed brought downstairs. I know that's been our exercise room and den, and I need to switch it with the bedroom that's upstairs. And they not only came and shifted all the furniture, they repainted the room for him.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, they did all sorts of things that they could do. But, I think that if you are bless your neighbors as much as you can, they in turn will bless you.
That's the way God works, doesn't it?
Yes.
And his principles work, and they stand the test of time, whether we're Christians or not Christians. When we do the right thing for the right reason, blessings come back to us, and hopefully that those blessings and other reasons, they will draw people to his side, and we have the opportunity to speak words of life to them. Going back to the medical situation, were you happy? Were you satisfied with the first round of your medical team? Did you have to change them up, or was it completely wonderful all the way through?
Well, obviously we weren't going back to the people who misdiagnosed it. So we immediately switched to Johns Hopkins, and the head of oncology there took him on as a patient. He did not take that many personal patients on, but he took Jim on because of the situation and what had happened, since the medical center was actually even under Johns Hopkins. So that his regular medical doctor. So that was a little different, and they certainly were very good about everything. And Jim has had such a great sense of humor and such a positive attitude right to the end that they just loved him as a patient. And, there were things when he would do his chemo, he would go in for the checkup a couple weeks later, and he would look and say, I get zapped with krypton, and as soon as I get back to my Superman strength, you hit me again. So he would just make these sort of comments all the time, which made everybody quite happy and, laughing at them.
Broke the tension. And he says like he was just one of those people all his life.
Oh, yeah, always. Oh, he always made people smile, always kind, always generous, and always a sweet sense of humor, never cutting or sarcastic humor. So, which was very, very nice. And people were so good. I mean, I can remember just a note with an author friend, Mary Keneally, I never say her name right, when I mentioned that I saw one of her books in the cancer center where he was having his chemo treatments, and I had been reading a different book, so I picked up that one. She sent me a whole case of books to read and put in the cancer center there.
Oh, how kind was that?
I know, just so sweet, because she has so much humor in her books. They were really good ones to grab and pick up and pass on for others who might want to read them.
Yes. So how did you two meet in the first place? How did you get together with this handsome, tall, accomplished man who was wonderful and funny?
I went to college across the street at Connecticut College, and I was getting a math degree, but I was taking my applied mathematics over at the Coast Guard Academy and knew a lot of other cadets, and so I would go to Wednesday night church services there, and it was really someone specifically asked me to go one night so they could introduce me to Jim, although we found out later 3 or 4 other couples kept trying to set us up and everything kept falling through. So it wasn't the right time, but it was the right person. And all I knew was he was tall. And I said, do I, at 5'4", look like I need somebody who's 6'4" in my life?
How many years did you have together all total?
Well, 3 years before we were married and 38 years of marriage, so 41 years.
And it wasn't enough, was it?
It wasn't what?
It was wonderful, but it wasn't enough, was it?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we always want more. Mm-hmm. You mentioned to me earlier that y'all chose to use hospice services when the time came. How did that work for your family, and what did you learn? What can you help us understand about that process?
Well, that was so nice. They came out with a bed, and I said, he's really tall. So they came out with the bed, and they realized it was too short. So they sent over a handyman to lengthen the bed.
Oh.
Of the hospital bed, because it was not long enough for him. And that was so nice. And there were things like, even before hospice care, when I needed a walker for him and I needed something else, or maybe we had hospice care, but I needed the porta potty kind of thing. They told me to just call the vets organization, and I don't know which one, but they just brought it out to the house, and afterwards they picked it up for me, and everyone did that. And hospice said, what do you want? These are services. So one of the things I wanted was for somebody to come and give them a sponge bath a couple times a week and things. The only thing that was a little bit hard was they kept wanting to give him morphine, and he wasn't in any pain. And I kept saying, no, we don't want morphine because he's in no pain. And he kept saying, and after a week or two of their asking continually, they stopped asking.
How delightful that he didn't have pain. How did that work out? How was that possible? What he's undergoing?
You know, he had pain before that. For a couple of months, he'd had a lot of back pain. Off and on, he had back pain. But at that time, God just took away the pain. That's all I can say. There was no reason for him to not have pain, but he didn't have pain. He didn't even need an aspirin. He needed no medication for that.
Praise God. How you were already so very close, so tight-knit, a family and a couple, even a community. How did Christ come even deeper into your life? Or tell us about that emotional and that spiritual journey that you and Jim had together.
Yeah. I would say one of the things that, well, you want me to leave that for later. One of the things that happened is we just had a lot of people who wanted to pray with us. And of course, we always did that. We had neighbors who were saying, you know, we're just watching and we can't believe how you and Jim are taking this and how well you're doing on this journey. And that is, you know, a blessing and certainly a way you want to witness. You don't want to ever have to have that kind of a witness. But as long as you're going to have that happen, you're thankful God is using it.
Yes, 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 yes.
And I have to say, my husband was so sweet. There were things he did I didn't even realize he was doing till he passed away. After he died, I was cleaning up his shoes and found my favorite chocolates that he had saved there for me. And I was cleaning up some of his clothes and found hand lotions. And when I went to light the first fire that fall, after he passed away, he had already set up all the twigs and everything for me to just light the match. So he did anything he could do to give me this gentle goodbye.
So touching, so touching. And a representative of his love and his character, isn't it?
Yes, because he was always kind, considerate, always thoughtful.
And did you, as you were going through the process, how long was the treatment? Let me back up. Did you start immediately with the treatment plan, or how long did that last?
In 2010, the treatment started immediately with the chemo. We had to tell the grandchildren that lived with us, Ethan and Lily, that, you know, Papa is very sick and he needs medicine. And when he has that certain medicine treatments, he's going to come home and he's going to need to take naps. And he may not feel good. He may need some special cookies, ginger snaps, and certain other things. So don't eat all those if he's going to need them. Yeah. And they were so good. Lily was just 2.5. And so she would go up and say, I'm going to take a nap with you to make sure you can sleep. And she would bring cookies into him and things. So they were very loving, very good.
Excuse me. And what about with the Coast Guard service? That's what he had retired from. You had great insurance. That's a very practical issue that people are not often, if they're outside cancer, they're unaware of the needs there, aren't they? Financial needs.
Yes, and I don't even think hospice always knows. They quoted a certain price it would be per day of hospice care. Coast Guard covered it all. We had no charge for that. Only $25 for each ambulance ride between the two insurance companies. There really was very little. And even hospital stays were, no matter how long he was in, because there were a couple times he was in hospital, it was still only $25 each time. So I can't say that there was any burden of medical.
And that's definitely another rarity, another miracle. And you didn't have to travel hundreds of miles away from home for treatment. It was right there local because you're right there in the heart.
Yes. Yeah, we only had to go over to Annapolis from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. We didn't actually even have to go downtown to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. We went there once, maybe. I don't even think we did that because that doctor had his office right in Annapolis, too. He had a second office.
As the spouse who had a lot of people at the house, shall we say, and I know you went to appointments with him and treatment with him, and you were with him doing everything that you could. And then you had your own duties and responsibilities as an individual. in your writing career. How did your friends come alongside you and help you shore you up the community of love that you had developed through the years, Karen?
Well, one interesting thing, towards the end, the book I was doing, I was co-authoring with my oldest daughter. So she really got what was happening. My agent really got what was happening, and Zondervan was very good about that. So we all worked together as to what we were doing and the procedure of getting that through to get it ready for publication, and that helped a lot. I went, because I had a book release and everything was going to go on right during that time. That was the Homefront book. In fact, I asked Don Otis, I called him up and hired him to be my publicist because I had such a relationship with him. I knew he would understand. I could just send him a note or give him a quick call or have a child call him and say, hey, he just died. These are the dates, so work with us around that. And he was very good, and each time he'd say, are you going to be able to go on this day? Can you do this? And he was that buffer with any of the media that I often set up those myself, but not during that time. There are times that that's the time to go ahead and make sure you have someone else taking care of certain things.
Yes. Mm. And did you, I thought it just went whoop, just like that. It may come back to me. If it does, we'll circle back. Oh, thank you, Lord. It did. Did you find that the duties that you had as a writer were helpful to you to have something you had lots of time while you were waiting for his treatments and the various things that happened, even though you were very busy? Was it something, a gift from God that you had those things to take care of with your writing as well?
Yes, it was nice. I was writing a devotional, and while Jim was having the chemo treatment, so while he was undergoing chemo, I would just sit there writing that devotional, and I believe that was the 365 most important Bible passages for women. And so I'm writing about women's issues and women's things at the time that he's in there, including one chapter on men, women's perspective on men. But anyways, it was, that's more of a tongue-in-cheek humor month. At any rate, it helped me to have something else to be focusing on, and I had something similar when my father was passing and I was back and forth caregiving for my dad, that I was working on a different book at that time in that hospital.
Mm-hmm. Let me check Facebook, and then I want to ask you about you and Jim were so, there was laughter in the house. It traveled with both of you individually and collectively, so I'm wondering if you have a humor story you can tell us.
A humor story during all of this time?
It's not a funny topic at all, but I didn't know if maybe something had happened.
His attitude was just always good. I'm trying to think that because there was always humor, what funny things were going on. There were always something going on with those children who were living with us having those treatments, because Lily did not like taking her naps, and she'd climb out the window of the second story and stand up on the roof to wave to people going by, and he had to get up and nail those closed so she couldn't open them, and she all sorts of things.
And this is life in a big family, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And so, that just life just kept happening, and we just kept going with it, and that was perfectly fine. I wouldn't have wanted that to be any different.
Yes. Did it afford you an opportunity to get to know your daughter-in-law in a different way than you would have if that nucleus of time was not in place, that issue was not happening?
We did. But we knew she was having her own problems, and we attributed more from different wives we had known over the years when their spouse was deployed, especially to a danger zone. It wasn't until 6 months after she moved out and my son was back that we found out she had a brain tumor.
Karen.
So on top of everything else, she had her own issues, and there were a lot of times she sat in one particular recliner, and I just prayed as I would go by. I knew that she just had things going on, and God just said, just love her. So I just loved her, and I live only 4 miles from her now that I'm in Florida and she's here. So it's fine. And she appreciated what we did. She wasn't always aware of what was happening between not sleeping well with Michael being gone and underlying medical issues that she didn't understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds like, again, a safe haven. You're always creating safe havens for people.
Well, yeah, I guess it's just, if I grew up with family. I grew up where 13 of my cousins lived within 3 houses either side of me, and grandparents were 2 houses away, and the more distant cousins were 5 miles,
The distant cousins.
With a few that were just a couple hours away, but yeah, we were all basically in the same town, and my parents' cousins, a lot of them were in the same region or town.
Sounds like rife for mischief, was it?
Oh, always, yes. I grew up where, grown cousins would have water fights with each other, and all sorts of things would go on, and it would be a lot of fun, and we'd picnic together on 150 acres my grandfather bought just for picnics on the weekends, and we would just always had lots of fun.
Mm-mm-mm. And then you tell me one time that Jim came from a small family?
He did. He had no cousins.
No cousins.
And he came to visit was Easter. He was at an Easter egg hunt with 20 cousins on my mother's side, and then we went to my father's side and had an Easter dinner. So he met tons of cousins in the same day. In fact, I have a good story with that. At my grandmother's, one of my grandmother's funerals, I had never gone through all the names of family. There were too many. The family founded Connecticut in the 1630s. We were still there. And my Uncle Frank walks in the door, and he's very tall, looks around, sees Jim, so he walks right over to Jim in the center of the room. He's in his 80s. Great Uncle Frank looks at my husband and said, "You must be a Hall." And Jim didn't know that was a family name. He looks all around and says, "Actually, I'm a broom closet."
Okay, that tells us about Jim right there.
Yes, that's the only thing that got my grandfather to laugh that week.
Oh boy. How did he, I know he's surrounded by people that y'all had served and ministered to. Men often don't share their feelings openly, even with close friends. How did he handle that? Do you know? Were you even privy to that, since it usually is a very private matter?
Well, sometimes I wasn't, because there'd be neighbors who were guys who would offer to stay with him if I had to go somewhere, and they'd drop over to talk with Jim, and I'm sure they talked, and I don't, they were Christian men. I don't know what all they were talking about, because, I did respect his relationships with people too. And the same with, if we had sons up and even daughters up, if they wanted time to talk with their daddy, I felt they should have time to talk with their dad. I do know that when Darlene could not come towards the end, because she had 5 children, and yes, they were all born before then, so that some of them were babies. She made a recording of her singing and playing the flute, but singing hymns for him. And anytime he started getting agitated in the last few days, I would just play that music, and he would just calm down, just hearing his daughter's voice singing to him.
Nice.
So, it's just those connections they had that just went right through and permeated into his heart and soul when he needed that.
Mm. And it sounds like he did have access to men if he chose to.
Yes, yeah, different midshipmen, if they wanted to talk to him. We would have things set up at the academy that if somebody wanted to talk, they could go out in the hallway or sit in the back of a room and be able to talk. So there was always an ability to do that without being alone, particularly, say, with the opposite sex. There's always rules within the military, and rules that you should just follow, with men and women. But there was always that availability to be able to chat.
I know that you, this is not a part of your ongoing life. It is some of the guests that I'm having this week. It is still, they're speaking and advocating for, on a grand scale, at some regional, some national. But you still have a heart for getting the word out about, even though you're writing and you're doing your normal mother or so forth, you're still talking about male breast cancer when you can, aren't you?
Well, I do, because my husband was tested. His sisters had been tested. They had breast cancer, as I had mentioned. They had the BRCA2 gene. He was tested for that. He had that gene, which meant all our children need to be tested, and they have not really been tested yet. And we have had nephews and nieces tested. Some have been negative. Some have been positive, including a nephew. So it will continue to be in the family, and something that has to be watched for of the descendants of his siblings and himself. So it does not go away in a full sense, not when you have that genetically altered gene.
Mm-hmm.
So that has to be a concern always.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because men don't usually have breast cancer till their late 50s. I don't feel that my children feel pressured to get it done. I believe my son Michael's having it done and my daughter Rebecca, because they're into their 40s now. So there's a point at which they all think they have to get this done. And depending on those results, it can push the others to do more too.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we have the results. Now, one thing being, once one person in the family has been tested, and it's a very expensive test, after that, all you need are the results of that test, and there's a much less expensive, very easy blood test for the rest of the family to take.
It's a very a less expensive blood test. What was the last of that?
It's very easy to have that done. So once you have the results from one family member that has the gene, those results are very important to have and to pass on medically, because then the other family members can get tested. Without the full-blown test, it's a much simpler test to have done because they know the gene they're specifically looking for.
Okay, that is a really important piece of information. I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
It's also possible, it sounds like, amongst the family members, that you could even work out a financial deal, and everybody takes some part of the expensive test, the burdens of that.
Well, I would guess if it hasn't been done and you think it may be in your genes, you might want to consider that, especially once you have anyone with male breast cancer. Certain people, because of the cancer they have and family history, will get tested and the insurance will cover. Once that's done, then you need to spread the word to everyone else so they will know.
Okay.
That first one is a very key test to have done, and one of my sisters-in-law had it done. And so Jim, actually, his testing was based off of that testing.
And is there a particular phrase for that testing?
Well, people say brachia, but it's BRCA2, brachia, or BRCA testing.
Okay. You had books going on then. You have books going on now. This is your life, writing and speaking, and you did not choose to write anything about breast cancer, and yet you are still getting the word out when you have availability, and the Lord has blessed your work, hasn't He? You're still going strong with your writing.
Yes, He has, and I did write one thing, and I really didn't write it as much as Jim dictated a vision he had that I passed on to Cease Murphy, and that is a chapter in his book, I Believe in Heaven, which was published after Jim passed away. Cease was wonderful. As soon as he found out Jim had cancer, he prayed for him every day for the entire journey of 2.5 years. And so when I happened to see a note that he was looking for more stories about heaven, and I said, then I'm supposed to give you this story. And that's what I did.
And what was Jim's vision of heaven that God shared with him?
That was very interesting. He couldn't sleep, and he was up in the middle of the night just praying for a long time. When Jim looked up, and he said it was like seeing this amoeba, a science person might say those terms, up in the sky, and it parted, and he realized it was the Holy Spirit, at which point these hands with white robes reached down and said, come up, and he heard this beautiful, beautiful music of a heavenly choir. Mm-hmm. And then another hand came out and said, no, it's not your time, and it was Jesus. At which point Jesus said, it's not your time. He repeated that, but it's coming soon, so prepare everything. And that was the end of the vision.
And it went in Cease's book. How long was that? And that was in the middle of his treatment plan about?
It was actually during a time of remission when the doctor said, you are doing great. We think you're past everything. We think you're doing fine. This was in December. He didn't even tell me till March. He just kept pondering it and praying about that. And he felt, well, since everything's in remission, I don't want to say something now, and let's just enjoy a few months before I tell any of the family. So that was, and when he did tell me, it was just before some things started up again. And that was a very comforting thing to have happen, because you might look back and say he was misdiagnosed. Was I upset with the doctors or anyone else? But we said all the days of his life are in the hands of God, not in the hands of a diagnosis, not in the hands of a doctor. We're going to trust God for that. And afterwards they said it doesn't matter whether it was cancer or not. Jim was going to be taken to heaven at that time. God was very, very certain in assuring us that was going to happen. And in actuality, he then had cancer in the soft tissue around his spine. Most people would say it metastasized. I don't know the final answer, but the doctors did some tests. They said, we think that was a secondary cancer and not the same source of cancer.
Oh. Oh.
But his death certificate does say breast cancer.
Hmm. So all the way to the end, as usual, Christ was right there, leading the way, revealing his truth, himself, his heart, his love, his promise.
Right. Mm-hmm. He was, yeah, very much surrounding us and giving us comfort and surrounding us with friends. And I mean, even when Jeanette Wendell's husband, Marty, when she sent us the email that Marty had been woken to pray for Jim and wanted to know why, we knew then that God could bring up as many prayer warriors as he wanted for Jim. That we didn't have to tell people. God himself could touch them and tell them to pray for him.
That's a beautiful thing. It's we know that from years past, all the generations of humanity who have lived and not been able to get in touch with their loved ones, and here it is. Even in the age of the internet, the Lord can still connect people.
Yes, he can. And so it's amazing, but it's very comforting when you realize God has awoken someone to pray, and they are such a prayer warrior, then you know God is going to do something, and there's a purpose for that.
Yes.
To happen. And even as Jim was close to dying, the last few days, and he was getting weaker, he said to me one morning, he said, I don't know if I did everything God wanted me to do. I don't know if I've impacted lives and made a difference. And I said, well, of course you have. But just then I got a little ding on the computer, and I looked, and there was an email, and I opened it up, and I said, I have to read this to you, honey. And it was one of Jim's classmates, whose name was also Jim. And Jim wrote to my husband and said, I've been meaning to tell you this for decades, that probably 30 years ago, I was at training at the base where you were stationed, and you had some classmates and myself over to dinner that night. And when we sat down for dinner, Jim, you slipped a napkin on your lap and just as easily slipped into a prayer from the heart. I've never heard anyone pray like that. And for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I could not get that prayer out of my mind. And I finally started praying with my family, and it changed our lives.
One final gift.
I know. And I said, see, Jim, there are probably hundreds, maybe thousands of stories like this that you may not know on this side of heaven, but God knows them.
Yes. What a beautiful ending to our visit today. Thank you so very much for sharing your heart, your story, the funny things that your husband, a few of the funny things that he did after 41 years. There's got to be a long list. Do you still run into, I'm sure you do, instances and something weird or odd would happen and you think of him immediately, he would get such a kick out of this, or he would have made a joke about that. It still has to happen.
And my sons have his sense of humor, so there's times they'll say things and I'll think, oh, well, that's exactly what Daddy would have thought.
That's always very nice, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you again. I know that people will be watching. Oh, yes, that's a great photograph. I'm so glad you have that available.
This side, so yeah. Well, I keep this by my desk.
Very handsome. Very handsome. I know that people who are watching live and in the replay are going to be helped by your words and your story of hope and faith and the reality that life is what it is, but God is He's still available, He's still able, He's still willing to shore us up and be with us and support us and speak to us and help us bear our loved ones if that was His answer. Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, viewers, as well. This is a very important topic that's close to Karen's heart, and if you'd like to know more information, let us know. We'd be glad to give that information to you, whether you're watching the live or the replay. This has been Marketers on a Mission, episode 141, Men Get Breast Cancer Too, with guest author Karen Whiting. Tomorrow, author Lynn Hartke will join us. She and both of her parents had cancer at the same time. Like Karen, Lynn will share her story of hope And these days, this week, there will be hard words, hard truths, but they are surrounded by hope and love and faith. And that's what we want you to both know the information and hear the Holy Spirit. We're here every weekday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. This program is designed for you to help you understand how to write as a professional. In this particular week, we're having a very special week, Breast Cancer Awareness. And October, the entire month, is Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the U.S. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.